Spanning over 4,000 miles, the Nile is the world's longest river, winding its way from the highlands of Ethiopia and the heart of East Africa to the Mediterranean Sea. Throughout history, this mighty river has been the lifeblood of civilizations, from the ancient kingdoms of Nubia to the powerful Egyptian Empire, sustaining millions and shaping the rise of empires along its fertile banks. Its waters, sourced primarily from the Blue Nile in Ethiopia and the White Nile in Uganda, have supported agriculture, trade, and life itself for millennia. But today, the river that once gave life is turning into a battleground. Ethiopia and Egypt, two nations tied together by the Nile, yet torn apart by their conflicting ambitions, now face off in a high-stakes battle for its future.
Now, still no deal between Egypt and Ethiopia over an enormous new dam that Ethiopia has built on the Blue Nile.
Its efforts to push Ethiopia to agree to an external mediator concerning the construction of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam may not be successful.
Tensions escalated in August when two Egyptian C-130 military planes landed in Mogadishu, signaling the start of a defense pact signed between Somalia and Egypt. This agreement, formed during a state visit by Somalia's president to Cairo, involves the deployment of up to 5,000 Egyptian troops to a new African Union force, with an additional 5,000 potentially arriving later. Ethiopia has mobilized forces to ensure that Cairo's reach does not extend into what it sees as its sphere of influence in the Horn of Africa. Just days ago, Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed issued a chilling warning against any invasion of Ethiopian territory. Tensions are rising, and his message was clear. Ethiopia will not stand idly by as Egyptian forces prepare to deploy under the guise of peacekeeping missions. In Somalia's Gedo region, Ethiopian troops have seized control of strategic airports, preempting any attempts to airlift Egyptian forces into the region. These airports are more than just runways, they are lifelines, the only access to town surrounded by the Al-Shabaab militant group that has overrun much of Gedo, complicating any planned Egyptian deployment. Behind the scenes of this shadow conflict lies a much larger issue, the Nile. The Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, GERD, a hydroelectric project that could secure Ethiopia's future, is seen as a threat to Egypt's very survival. The Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam is a massive hydroelectric project located on the Blue Nile River in Ethiopia. Once completed, it will be the largest dam in Africa, standing 145 meters tall and 1.8 kilometers long, with a total capacity of 74 billion cubic meters of water. The dam is expected to generate over 6,000 megawatts of electricity, which would provide a crucial boost for Ethiopia and neighboring countries, helping to power millions of homes and industries. Construction of the GERD began in 2011, and its reservoir has been gradually filling since 2020, even without a final agreement between Ethiopia and downstream countries Egypt and Sudan. The dam is a point of national pride for Ethiopia, symbolizing the country's development ambitions. However, Egypt views the GERD as a direct threat to its water security, as the Nile provides 90% of Egypt's fresh water supply. Any significant reduction in the river's flow could lead to devastating droughts, threatening agriculture and the livelihoods of millions of Egyptians. Ethiopia's sharp response followed a letter Egypt sent to the UN Security Council, accusing Ethiopia of violating international law by continuing to fill the dam without securing an agreement from downstream nations, including Egypt and Sudan. In a defiant statement, Ethiopia urged Egypt to abandon its aggressive approach, describing Cairo's claims as a litany of unfounded allegations. Egypt has long sought to control the Nile, a strategy dating back to the early 19th century when Khedive, or ruler Muhammad Ali, expanded Egyptian influence into Sudan. His grandson, Ismail Pasha, aimed to build an empire that encompassed the entire Nile Valley, including Ethiopia, the source of the Blue Nile. Ismail's ambitions led to several military campaigns against Ethiopia in the 1870s, but these culminated in a devastating defeat at the Battle of Gura in 1876. Ethiopia, under Emperor Johannes IV, resisted Egyptian expansion, crushing the Egyptian invasion and ending Cairo's hopes of creating an African empire that would rival European ones. Egypt is today still leaning on colonial-era treaties to maintain control over the Nile, while Ethiopia is standing firm on its right to develop the GERD and secure its energy future. Diplomacy has failed time and time again, leaving both nations locked in a high-stakes battle for dominance in the Horn of Africa. Militarily, Egypt holds a massive edge over Ethiopia. This disparity is evident in air power, where Egypt's 1,053 aircraft, including 250 fighter jets and 91 attack helicopters, far outmatch Ethiopia's 92 aircraft. On the ground, Egypt's 3,735 tanks and 11,000 armored vehicles greatly exceeds Ethiopia's 365 tanks and 130 armored vehicles. While Egypt's naval fleet, with 316 vessels, adds to its strategic reach, Ethiopia's landlocked status limits its maritime capabilities. Egypt's defense budget of $10 billion dwarfs Ethiopia's $520 million, allowing Egypt to maintain a far larger, better-equipped military force. Egypt's 450,000 active personnel, supplemented by reserves, vastly outnumber Ethiopia's 162,000 active soldiers with no reserve force. However, Ethiopia's ground forces are more experienced, having recently won against rebel forces in Ethiopia's Tigray province, and Ethiopia's rugged terrain could complicate any direct conflict. But, given Ethiopia and Egypt are not neighbors, just how would such a war be fought? Well, history might have some parallels. The Egypt-Ethiopia conflict bears striking similarities to the Arab League's efforts in the 1960s to divert the headwaters of the Jordan River to undermine Israel's national water carrier project. In both cases, water, a vital resource in arid regions, became the flashpoint for geopolitical tensions, leading to military posturing and, in the case of Israel, outright conflict. The Arab League's plan to divert the Hasbani and Banias rivers away from Israel, which aimed to choke Israel's water supply by 35%, mirrors Egypt's fear that Ethiopia's dam could significantly reduce the Nile's flow. Ethiopia, much like the Arab states in the 1960s, sees its control over water resources as a sovereign right and a vital component of its national development. The Arab-Israeli war over water of the 1960s escalated to military confrontation when diplomatic solutions failed, culminating in Israeli strikes on Syria. Israel viewed the Arab League's water diversion as a direct violation of its rights, and its military response was swift and decisive. Similarly, if Ethiopia continues to fill the GERD without a binding agreement with Egypt, the possibility of Egyptian military intervention, likely airstrikes targeting the dam itself, cannot be ruled out. Striking the GERD could have massive consequences, sparking a full-scale conflict across East Africa. The war over the Jordan River was one of the precursors to the Six-Day War in 1967, and a similar scenario could unfold between Egypt and Ethiopia, setting the stage for a larger regional war. It's for this reason that the military alliance between Somalia and Egypt so unnerves Addis Ababa. Ethiopia's frustration also stems from Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed's ambitions to secure a port, as Ethiopia has been landlocked since Eritrea's secession in the 1990s. A recent deal between Ethiopia and Somaliland, a breakaway region of Somalia, to lease a section of coastline for a naval base has worsened relations with Somalia, which views the agreement as a violation of its sovereignty over Somaliland. The deal has alarmed not only Somalia but also Djibouti, which relies on Ethiopia's trade for its port economy. Djibouti has attempted to de-escalate tensions by offering Ethiopia more access to its ports, but so far efforts to mediate by countries like Turkey have failed. Further warfare could lead to increased migration and draw in other regional powers like Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Turkey, potentially affecting global trade through the Red Sea. Likewise, Ethiopia itself is not the most stable of countries, as the recent bloody civil war in the country's northern ethnic Tigrayan regions demonstrates. Any wider regional war could see rebel groups within Ethiopia, like Tigrayans, receive outside help from Egypt and Ethiopia's perennial rival, Eritrea, leading to a bloody collapse of the multi-ethnic country. Forget conventional battles for now, though. This war is already being fought in cyberspace, and the first shots have already been fired online. The GERD has sparked the first known instance of an African cyber conflict, fueled by a surge in nationalistic fervor. In late June, Foreign Policy magazine reported how a group of young Egyptian hackers, calling themselves the Cyber Horus Group, launched a series of cyber attacks on more than a dozen Ethiopian government websites. Their message was clear: if the river's level drops, let all the pharaoh's soldiers hurry. The hacked sites featured a grim image of a skeletal pharaoh clutching a scythe, symbolizing Egypt's readiness to defend its water rights. On the other side, Ethiopian social media influencers like 21-year-old Liz spoke to Foreign Policy about how she and other influencers have taken to platforms like TikTok to taunt Egypt, dancing to popular Egyptian songs with messages of defiance. "There's no other country that can stop us," she declared in a video that went viral, rallying her 70,000 followers around the dam, turning the GERD into a national symbol of Ethiopian pride and patriotism. Meanwhile, Egyptians have responded with hashtags like #NileForAll, calling for the defense of their lifeline, the Nile, and warning of the consequences if Ethiopia continues filling the dam without an agreement. In the end, this is more than just a fight over water. For Ethiopia, the GERD is a symbol of development, economic growth, and energy independence. For Egypt, it's an existential threat to a resource that supports millions of lives. Decades of historical rivalries and unresolved diplomatic efforts have left the region teetering on the edge. The stakes are enormous. Water, livelihoods, and regional stability hang in the balance. Both countries must find a path to compromise before this dispute spirals out of control and leads to a conflict that neither can afford. So, what do you think? How would an Egypt-Ethiopia war pan out? Will diplomacy prevail, or are we on the brink of a larger confrontation in East Africa? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into global issues like this one.